All right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. Oh, you don't have to say it back. Thank you so much for being here today. So Columbia, this community is changing, and that's a given. How, though, we embrace that change, the impact we want to have on that change, even how we guide that evolution, that's really up to us. And that's what the speaker series is all about. My name is Danica Rines, and I like to say that I tell stories on behalf of Columbia Association for this community. I'm part of the communications team. And we, again, just thank you all for being here. A special thanks to Delegate Feldmark here in the building. Thank you so much. So really, we hope you all walk away tonight knowing that you are actively engaging the community just by being here, by spending this time with us, by hearing this amazing panel speak tonight, by asking your questions. You are getting engaged in the community, and that is something. That is not nothing. So thank you so much. Want to quickly thank the partners who are out in the lobby there as you arrived with the interactive stations. That was Civic Works, Howard County Office of Community Sustainability, and the Youth Climate Institute. Let's give them a quick little clap. A special thanks as well to our hosts here in River Hill, the River Hill Village Association here at Claret Hall for letting us use this space here. Okay, couple housekeeping notes. If you have not been to a change in Columbia, quick show of hands who hasn't been. Oh, yes. Yes, it's what we like to see, but then fewer hands down the road. We want to see you come back. So here's how we work here, okay? Q&A. We will have a short Q&A following the panel discussion today, but that is written only. Why do we do that? Why don't we pass around the mic? Well, we want to make sure that everyone has an equal chance, right? We want to make sure that everybody has an equal voice in this room. So if you haven't already, there were slips outside and pens as well. If you have a question, you can fill one of those out if you brought it in. If a question pops in your head, simply raise your hand and a member of our team will get you a pen and one of those slips of paper, and then just kind of raise your hand again. We'll come pick it up. What we'll do is kind of look at all of those together, see if there are any common themes, if we need to combine some questions, if there's too many to get to tonight or anything like that. And then we'll hand them off to our moderator here. So that's how we're going to do that portion. And just a heads up, this is being recorded and will be posted on CA's YouTube page afterwards, so you can share with others. We'll make sure to get you all that link if you were registered. So you're probably here tonight because you understand that as a community, we're already facing the challenges of climate change, right? And we're far from the only community experiencing this reality. In fact, starting tomorrow, I just read today about 70,000 people are going to gather in Dubai for the COP28 conference, right? And so that's the huge UN conference happening overseas. And they're going to talk about some of the things we're talking about tonight, the possible solutions to the challenges that we are all facing in different ways. And if you didn't know, Columbia was built on several principles, and one of them is respecting the land. And we now know in today's day and age, in order to do that, really, we have to respect the entire environment and really look out for all of it. So with that, I would like to introduce our moderator for this discussion, Cody Boteler. He is a graduate of Towson University. Cody's been reporting in and around Baltimore, for a decade now. After time with The Sun and other publications, he now writes for the Baltimore Banner, which, if you have not checked it out, it is a nonprofit digital news organization that's really strongly rooted in community and trust. I also hear they're working on a Howard County Bureau, but at the Banner, Cody is responsible for the daily morning newsletter called The Scan. He contributes to breaking news team coverage, and among his countless articles, he has also talked about and researched and reported on what we're here to talk about tonight. So please help me welcome Cody.
Hello. So as Danica said, I'm Cody. I work at the Banner. We are a nonprofit digital newsroom that started in Baltimore just about 1.5 years ago. Depending on how you count, I believe we are the largest news organization in Maryland. We are either like right behind or right at par with the number of journalists the Sun has, which is really exciting for us. We've been hiring like crazy and building out. And as she hinted, we are working on getting specific reporters. I think 2 Howard County reporters in the future, but do not quote me on that. Nobody told me I could say that. That's just what I hear. So before we get into it, I figured we'd just have the panel introduce themselves down the line, and maybe we'll start here and work our way toward the mirrors.
Excellent. Thank you, Cody. My name is Jeremy Scharfenberg. I'm the Interim Director of Community Operations for the Columbia Association. I've been with CA for about 11 years. The bulk of that time was serving as the Energy Manager for CA. Before joining Columbia Association, I was a consultant for about a decade working on climate change and sustainability issues at all sort of different spectrums, from the federal level programs all the way down to city and town implementation of climate change and sustainability measures.
Oh, there we go. Got it. Okay. I'm Avery Farrell. I'm with Howard County's Office of Community Sustainability. I've been there for about 2 years now. I started off as a Chesapeake Conservation Corps member, which is a program ran by the Chesapeake Bay Trust. It's to get young adults into the environmental field, which it worked. I got hired at the office about a year ago. I am the resiliency and watershed planning specialist there. I hope I didn't say that already. So this is actually my first time speaking in an audience like this. So yay. Yeah, it was like a cartoon scene, me getting ready, prepared for this. I was freaked out. Anyway, I graduated from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County with a degree in geography and environmental science. What got me interested in this field, when I was younger, I had read a book about climate change, but back then it was called global warming. And the symbolism I left that book like, oh my gosh, polar bears are falling off of ice caps. Like, this is scary. And then a little bit down the line, I figured out that I really loved the weather, and I romanticized severe storms. And now I know that that's a problem. But that is what inspired me to want to become a meteorologist. And then I realized I was not good at math or physics. So I settled with geography and environmental science, and I'm very happy with that decision because I realized that climate change impacts so many different systems that I really care about. Yeah, that's enough for me.
Hi, I'm Steve Pantano. I am a Columbia resident for 15 years or so. I live over in Hickory Ridge. I work for an organization called Rewiring America, which is a national nonprofit organization that works on policy and program implementation and research related to decarbonizing our housing stock. That comes through the removal of fossil fuels from a lot of the things that we do to power our lives, our vehicles, our cars, our water heaters, our furnaces, et cetera, replacing them with efficient electric alternatives. I've been working in and around energy efficiency and electrification for 15 or so years. Prior to that, did all kinds of engineering related stuff. And yeah, glad to be here.
I am also very bad at math and physics, which is why I'm a writer and do things like this instead of things like what Stephen and Jeremy do. So before we get into the real discussion, I think there are a few terms that we should kind of level set on and make sure we all understand what they mean, because climate change is a complex, multifaceted, complicated subject. So maybe, Stephen, we can start with you. You kind of touched on a little bit, but can you explain a little bit more about what electrification means? You know, what would that look like in somebody's house, for example?
Yep, so I'm happy to. And this is really an outsized impact in terms of the what any individual homeowner or even renters can do to make a difference on climate. One of the founders of our organization did a huge study for the Department of Energy 5 or 6 years ago, mapping all the energy flows in and out of our economy, and calculated that about 42% of the emissions impact, the energy-related emissions impact from our entire economy, come from a small handful of choices that we as individuals make about what appliances and equipment and things we put into our home and where we get our energy. So I'll use my own home as an example. I have 2 electric heat pumps that are my primary source of heating and cooling, and I have an oil boiler, which I wish I didn't have, but still have because I haven't replaced it yet, in my home as a source of backup heat. I have an electric water heater, which I'm just about to replace with an electric heat pump water heater. I have an induction stove, which I just recently put in to replace an electric resistance stove. So in a lot of cases, I'm going from electric to electric, but for people who have a gas stove or a gas water heater or just an oil boiler or just a gas furnace as a source of heating, moving to electric heat pumps, to heat pump water heaters, to induction, replacing your next vehicle with an electric vehicle or at least a hybrid vehicle, and putting solar on your roof or buying into a community solar plan are super impactful, much more from a climate and emissions perspective than recycling and some of the other environmental techniques that are great in their own right, but they don't add up quite as much and for as long as some of these electrification building decarbonization choices that we make.
Thank you. And then Avery, Jamie, we're going to talk about terms like resiliency, mitigation, adaptation. Maybe if the two of you just kind of want to help us understand what the difference between those three terms are and how we kind of think about those when we think about climate.
Yeah, so there's quite a few definitions of resiliency out there, but the resiliency that I'll be referring to is being resilient towards climate change impacts such as flooding, extreme heat, and so on. Adaptation is a little bit different than resiliency, but they can work together. But in this context, the way I'll be speaking about resiliency and also adaptation is for adaptation, it's the ability to adapt to climate change. So think about it like that.
And Jeremy, do you have anything to add maybe on mitigation, adaptation, or?
Yeah,
Mhm.
well, the mitigation component is sort of a term that's been around for a long time, and it's basically any type of strategy or measure that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions going to the atmosphere. It also includes any action steps that might promote carbon sequestration or efforts to basically pull or reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, forming chemicals that are in the atmosphere. So some of the things that's Stephen was talking about around electrification, that is from a life cycle perspective, assuming the electricity using is cleaner than the fossil fuel based source or the grid mix, you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions there. So it's a mitigation measure, but it includes the full gamut around promotion of renewable energy as an electrification source. Energy conservation is a big one. That's sort of where I really cut my teeth. I think for me, that's one of the most sort of foundational pieces in all of this, and is really cross-cutting, is energy conservation and energy efficiency. Energy efficiency measures are also climate change mitigation steps because you're reducing energy use, thereby reducing the associated greenhouse gas emissions. But you're also making whatever entity that is, whatever system, whether it's your house or a commercial building, if it's more energy efficient, it's also more resilient. It's also more adaptable to climate change, especially if there are envelope improvements that make it more able to withstand, radical shifts in temperature extremes. So they're all interrelated, but in general, mitigation is any step that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere.
Can you quickly explain what that envelope is that you just referenced?
Oh,
you
yeah,
threw that in
sorry.
there. Some people might not know.
Yeah, so the envelope is basically the outside of a home. It's what is essentially the barrier between your occupied conditioned space and the outside world. So it's basically what is where the energy transfer happens around heat and cold. And it's really what drives energy use to heat and cool a given space is the envelope that is sort of basically protecting it from those thermal changes.
Yeah. Thank you guys. So, again, big complex topic that if you're here, you probably at least have some understanding of, some interest in, but probably some questions about as well. So I'm wondering, maybe we'll just go down the panel again and we can maybe start with you, Stephen, this time, and we'll work this way. Just on, as you've been in this world of climate and discussing climate change, maybe or what the biggest misunderstanding that you encounter is, or just something that surprised you when you learned it is in regards to climate and climate adaptation.
I'll stick with my favorite topic of building electrification. It's really about these individual choices that as homeowners, you get to make once every several years, right? These are not your water heater, you might replace it every 10 years, your heating system every 15. These are points in time where you have a really meaningful choice to make. And if you choose to stay with an incumbent technology and a fossil fuel heating source, and in many cases, you're essentially locking in that emissions from that building for the next 15 years, because it's not cost effective often to replace that heating system before the end of its life. You've made a big investment. Why would you want to do that, right? So a lot of what we're talking about here is, when being prepared, having a plan, when your water heater is about to go, or it's 10 years old and you'll need to replace it soon, be ready to put that more efficient electric version in so that you can reap all the benefits of clean energy over time. And that sort of goes to a bit of what Jeremy was talking about as well with the energy system that we have here in Maryland. It's pretty clean on a national basis, but it's not 100% clean today. But there are two things that can happen. One, when you make that choice to put in electric devices, if you are then to add solar panels to your roof or buy into a community solar project, you're getting clean energy, and your investment in the infrastructure of your home becomes that much cleaner right away. The energy system itself is also getting cleaner, and the state and power companies are investing in grid scale renewables all the time. So that choice you make today to put in a heat pump or a heat pump water heater is going to be an appreciating asset from a climate perspective, because its emissions 5 years from now will be less than the emissions today, even if you don't do rooftop solar. So that's kind of an interesting thought experiment, as you're making investments in your future. They also happen to make your home healthier and more comfortable. There's a lot of research about emissions from fossil fuel combustion in the home, particularly from gas stoves, and the impacts on asthma and other health impacts. So there's like multiple benefits here, and they get better over time.
So I wouldn't really say misconception or a surprising thing. But I did want to, aside from like the people that are like climate change is not real, I think a big problem and something that's kind of holding us back is the idea of climate change, or climate change is not impacting me personally, which is just untrue. It's impacting you, it's impacting your neighbor, it's impacting your animals, your assets, property, whatever. And then a lot of people feel very anxious, apathetic, like they can't do anything because the problem is so big that like what could you possibly do as an individual person. So I'm hoping to kind of undo that mindset the more we discuss this, and they will also be doing the same thing. Yeah, so climate change is 100% impacting you, and there are things that you can do to protect yourself.
For me, I think as someone who's worked specifically around climate change modeling projections, starting 20 years ago, the global circulation model projections, everything's happening faster than we thought, right? Everything that we thought would happen at 2075 or 2100 from the projections from 20 years ago, they're starting to show up now, right? The signal is starting to come out of the noise, if you will. So I think for me, what has been really eye-opening is, all of these things that we talked about around more intense rain events, more extended droughts, the basic precipitation patterns, that hydrograph getting flatter, where there are more intense rain events, more dry periods, and fewer of the sort of normal rain events. So for me, that's really sort of the most surprising and eye-opening aspect of this, is those impacts that Avery was talking about are happening much sooner and faster than we thought. Some of the feedback loops, that were perhaps underrepresented in the models 20 years ago are really showing up. And it's today, it's the wildfires in Canada, and closing. CA had to close pools this summer, right? Who would have thought that a wildfire in Canada would result in us having to close pools, like impacting us right now? So that, for me, that's sort of the big piece, is what's really surprising, having worked in this for long.
I promise we will try to not end on that much of a bummer note. But it's a sobering topic, and I'm glad that we are here taking it seriously, and I'm glad Columbia Association's having these kinds of conversations. So it's my understanding that Howard County is either just about to or just put out their updated climate action and resiliency plan. Avery, what can you tell us kind of about what that plan is and what some of those key takeaways might be?
Yeah, sure. So we recently published our climate action and resiliency plan in June. It was about a year and a half long process. We did have two other climate action plans, one in 2009, and I think the other one was in 2015. And that just focused on county emissions and reducing that. And it wasn't really like a community-wide scope of anything. And this climate action plan, what makes it so different is we also not only are talking about county emissions, but also community-wide emissions. And then another really important piece that's been coming up, and you will see a lot of climate action plans have been starting to incorporate resiliency. So stuff, again, that we can do to help protect ourselves and protect our natural systems.
What are some of the key plans or the key takeaways from that document the county published?
Yeah, so we have just give me 1 second, I have to look at the exact numbers. So our big goal right now, the county executive order set ambitious county goals to reduce greenhouse gases by 60% by 2030 and be net zero by 2045, which is slightly more ambitious than the state goals. And on top of that, like we've already reduced county emissions since our other climate action plans. And I think a big key takeaway is the community portion. Like even if the county does whatever they can to reduce county emissions, we still have to work with the community, because we can't just go up and tell the community what to do and how to reduce their emissions. So, yeah.
All right, thank you. So we'll keep it a little bit local, and then we'll kind of zoom out a little bit. The Columbia Association was just invited to the White House not that long ago, right? And recognized for efforts in something called the Better Buildings Challenge. Jeremy, could you explain to us what that is and how it links back to the local efforts here?
Sure. Yeah, so the Columbia Association has been a longtime partner with both the EPA's Energy Star program as well as the Department of Energy's Better Buildings Challenge. These are voluntary programs basically nationwide, where sort of leading industries in this space can engage with each other, share best practices, collaborate with the Department of Energy, with the labs throughout the country around advancing technology like heat pumps, for example, and electrification. So as a partner with the Department of Energy's Better Buildings program, we've been very progressive around volunteering to establish aggressive reduction goals for both our energy use as well as our greenhouse gas emissions. So we were recently recognized for achieving our stretch goal of reducing our energy use by 30% as an organization within 10 years. And we actually hit a 32% reduction in energy use relative to our 2012 baseline. So that's pretty tremendous, right? Energy efficiency is really key. And when we've cut our use by a third. And so we were invited to a ceremony at the White House to be recognized and celebrated for that. And so kudos to the, thank you. Well, it's really kudos to the community for the support that is provided, the board of directors, CA presidents throughout the years that I've worked with. It's easy to achieve things when you have the entire organization and community behind these efforts. And so as an organization and within the Columbia Association, I've really viewed our role as really critical as a sort of a trusted messenger on these measures, on these steps, on being progressive and taking these actions within your operations or within your home as a resident, right? So if we can reduce our energy use by 30% by deploying heat pumps, by using advanced energy efficient technologies like lighting. Lighting is tremendous right now in terms of the amount of energy savings that can be achieved. And then we sort of take that message out into the community and empower and educate our residents to do these same things. And so that's what we've been doing with quarterly energy meetings, promoting home performance with Energy Star, as well as our solar cooperative. You know, every 3 months, we're out there with a virtual meeting, inviting our residents. You know, it's 25 or 30 people every quarter with Civic Works. Victor, where you're at, you know, and so that is sort of part of the dual role I view our energy and sustainability program is leading by example, achieving real results within our operations, and then empowering and educating the community to do the same thing in their own lives. And that's part of what that program's about. And then sharing those best practices with other entities and organizations that are trying to do the same thing within their building portfolios to reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. So that's sort of a quick hit on that.
I'm gonna guess that not a lot of communities were invited to the White House to celebrate their energy use. So like we're all very lucky to live in a place that has an organization like CA that's willing to do this work and lead by example. It's not everywhere by any means, and lucky to have people like Jeremy doing the hard work to make it actually happen. We in my work, we really believe that community-led efforts are critical to this transition. There's a lot of people who don't know about these things that they can do in their homes and in their lives, and communities are exactly that trusted messenger to get the word out. So the fact that I'll have a chance to talk to all of you tonight is part of that example. And the fact that you can all go to one of this building or any other CA facility and experience efficient and low emissions buildings for yourself and see that they're functionally no different and perhaps a lot better than the buildings you remember from the past is a really important thing to prove that the technologies work, that they're widely available, and that you can do the same types of things in your own home.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, yeah, the lighting in here doesn't look any different than what I'm used to. It's not like it's you know, it's great. Cool. And then actually there was also you all at CA also recently did a climate vulnerability assessment. Is that right? So can maybe talk a little bit what that is first, and then maybe we can get into what we learned and how vulnerable this area might or might not be to certain aspects of climate.
Sure. You know, so our climate vulnerability assessment was basically an exercise that we undertook a couple years ago to assess the vulnerability of our key infrastructure assets. So our bridges, our facilities, our tot lots, our playgrounds that are out there in the community. How can they be impacted by classic climate change impacts around high intensity rain events, so flooding within our community, extreme heat events, intense weather events like storms, the derechos, that have happened, for example. So we actually had a study completed. We leveraged GIS as sort of the basis for it. So a geographic information system platform where we actually were able to we have geocode, geographic sort of spatial information for every asset in our community. And then we're able to create a simulation of what a extreme weather event would be in the future, and then model that flooding within the Columbia community. And so we actually have a report that's available on our sustainability website and a interactive GIS tool where residents can actually log into this story map and drill down to their own home or some asset, some feature within the community that they are interested in, and see what the flooding projections are for 50 years from now. So it was a really groundbreaking study because typically vulnerability assessments have been happening for coastal communities where sea level rise is the classic threat. But inland communities like Columbia, Maryland, and other areas are impacted by other adverse weather events like flooding, like so Ellicott City, right? That's the classic scenario. So the outcome of the study, in addition to the information that's available for residents to utilize themselves, is that for the most part, our assets are fairly well protected from a flooding perspective. Most of them are at high elevation. Our community is fairly topographically diverse. We have fairly aggressive stream valleys. So for the most part, our assets are fairly resistant to any climate change impact. So I think it was only about 4% of our bridges and tot lots and other assets were at risk from that study. And then one of the things that's come out of it is in terms of, for example, some of the new infrastructure we're building, or so the bridges that we're putting in now in the community, they're all about 8 inches higher in elevation than our older bridges. So part of that is to get the bridges, get that infrastructure up out of the stream bed for multiple purposes. One is to make it more resistant to, a flooding event where that flow would be higher. So I strongly recommend everybody to check out our website on the sustainability portion, look at the report, and then dive into the GIS tool for some information.
I'm gonna take a yardstick out to the next bridge I see.
That's right.
It's the kind of thing you don't necessarily think about until somebody has to come and do it.
Yeah.
And Avery, didn't Howard County do a CVA as part of the report too?
Yeah, well, first I want to say, Jeremy and Columbia Association, your vulnerability assessment was very impressive, and it really highlighted what assets are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So our vulnerability assessment looked at slightly different things. We looked at how vulnerable critical facilities are, and we are pretty well positioned in that regard. There were a couple vulnerable facilities such as I think it's the, I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's like a water pump thing, and it's located in a floodplain. So we used floodplain data from FEMA and floodplain data, meteorological temperature data sets, and also a BMC vulnerable population index. And we our contract or consultant threw that into a GIS system. And you obviously know a lot more about GIS. So combine all that, put that in a GIS system, and then we were able to highlight some locations that are vulnerable to extreme heat and flooding.
And so what are some of the biggest threats that were identified for Howard County? Like, we're not suddenly going to see a bunch of wildfires out in the western part of the county, right? It's not that sort of thing.
Yeah. The CA vulnerability assessment and also Howard County identified the same largest threats to Howard County, which is extreme heat and increased precipitation in a short period of time. And that is a very, you really want to keep that in mind, is that these precipitation events are becoming more intense, and not because it's like more rain, but it's more rain in such a short period of time, and then it starts building in our systems. It kind of overloads our systems. And then lastly, also flooding. And before our climate vulnerability assessments, the 2016 and 2018 flood, we were very well known because Old Ellicott City was just completely destroyed. And these were 2 rain events that made these 2 flood events were both 1 in 1,000 year flood events, which means that there is a 0.1% chance of a flood like that occurring in a year. That percentage is so low, and the fact that that happened twice within the span of a couple of years was very, very concerning.
Real quick, I would like to caveat our study a little bit. If you do go into the tool and look at the flooding scenarios, they are fairly extreme, because we're taking the 1% storm, scaling it up by 30%, and then simulating what that would do to the community. So it's purely informational. Don't be alarmed. Don't be scared. It's just an elaborative effect of what a worst case would be. I just wanted to throw that caveat out there for folks to jump on and get scared.
Better to be over prepared than under prepared.
Exactly. Especially since, like you said, we saw those 2 extreme floods in Ellicott City within 3 years of each other, 2 years, something. Yeah, it was ridiculous. Avery, I'm glad you mentioned the idea of vulnerable populations, because when we're talking about well, maybe not glad, that doesn't seem quite right. But when we're talking about climate change and talking about how different communities are going to adapt and prepare, we can't do that without talking about equity and how different groups are affected differently. So I'm wondering if maybe we can talk about how some folks are more vulnerable to the impact of climate than others. So Avery, starting with you, how does your work or work that you've seen make sure that more vulnerable communities are protected and supported?
Yeah, sure. So first, I kind of want to start with an example so you guys understand a little bit better of what I'm talking about. The Katrina, which hit New Orleans region a while back, like 2000, whatever. I need to stop trying to remember these specific details. But there were a lot of warnings saying like evacuate, but there were, and specifically non-white Black populations were left behind because of a long systematic like oppression and systematic inequalities as well. They didn't really have the means to just pack up and leave. So a lot of them saw their homes completely destroyed. So what we've been doing now is, so first with our vulnerability assessment, we first started with the BMC Vulnerable Population Index, which identified the seniors, people that don't speak English, people of color, and a few other groups. And then we started like really diving into these specific groups that might have less access to the resources and services that are out there. And we are a very resource rich county, which we are very fortunate, but a lot of our messaging doesn't reach many communities, and it's just such a small amount of people that know what is available, and it's because we're hoping to improve community engagement and education and outreach in more targeted locations that are more vulnerable. Like I mentioned from the climate vulnerability assessment, a couple places were highlighted, and doing like direct meeting people where they are and going out and speaking to them, and also inviting these populations to the conversation, or listening to their stories as well, because I think a lot of us will, a lot of us will go into these communities and assume that we know what's best. So a lot of our, there's about, equity is integrated into our climate action plan and about almost all the different actions, but there are a few specific strategies that are literally just focused on improving communication, education, and outreach, and especially towards disadvantaged communities or underserved groups. So
cool. Stephen, what does equity look like in your work? You know, when we're talking about electrification or other types of improvements like that, like if I'm a renter, there's not much I can do, right? Like, so what does it look like in your world?
It's a huge part of our work right now. As Avery said, there's a lot of outreach and communication and planning around how to reach people, not from, through people in their communities that they can trust, right? So this is why community engagement matters. It might be through a church group or fraternity, or any, like, community can mean a lot of different things, right? It's not just a geographic community. There's lots of ways to reach people and tell the stories about success and sort of lead by example. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about that, and the reason is that a lot of the impacts of climate change, if we've talked about, will disproportionately affect people in low and moderate income communities who often live in older or poorly maintained building stock that may be more drafty or have non-functioning cooling equipment or have other maintenance issues and mold and other remediation needs, right? You kind of need to take a very holistic approach to improving people's, in our world at least, improving people's entire housing situation, not just selling a new piece of technology, right? That's not going to solve a systemic problem. It's going to be incremental. What you really need to do is invest holistically in communities in a way that improves, remediates housing, improves the weatherization and the building envelope, as Jeremy discussed, and brings in the new equipment that's going to help improve people's lives and save them money, and do it in a way where you're actually addressing, proactively addressing people who need the most support so they don't get left behind in this transition. And also, to the extent that you can, ensuring that you're helping the people who are going to save money over time as well, because there's a lot that goes into energy bills, right? So a lot of people on gas today, natural gas is pretty cheap because it's heavily subsidized. So it's harder to save money generally speaking, converting from natural gas to electric versus converting from a fuel like oil, which is much more expensive, to electric. So there's a lot of factors that go in. You really need to get into a community, work with community leaders, understand who the people are that you need to be reaching, how to reach them, and let the communities lead the way and support communities in doing a lot of the work to have that sort of holistic impact that we need.
That's great. Thank you. We are definitely going to come back to the cost of some of these things, because that's something that as a homeowner, I am personally very interested in and would love to know what you might be able to help me with. But before we get there, Jeremy, when we're talking about sustainability in and around Columbia, how do you approach that with the equity lens? What sort of things are you looking for?
Ooh, great question. I think it's the challenge is, fitting in energy efficiency and sustainability into a value proposition for an individual where, based on the socioeconomic status, is different than yours, and they have other priorities and challenges around basic existence, right? And so I think one of the key pieces is education and awareness of programs that are out there. There are a tremendous number of income-based energy efficiency programs where there can be low or no cost improvements made to a home for homeowners based on their income status that will result in meaningful effects for them around their utility costs, which can be a significant portion of their monthly income is just paying their basic bills. And then, one of the things that Avery mentioned in terms of is awareness of where cooling centers are, for example, just basic information of what is available from an existing resource perspective for these populations that they can access that maybe they just don't know about, that's down the road, or steps they can take to help sort of manage their daily lives in a more resilient way. So a lot of it's just about educating and empowering. Again, those are sort of the key buzzwords, right? And that there are programs out there, and that's one of the great things about CivicWorks, and one of the sort of key aspects of some of the programs that they implement in collaboration with us and Howard County. They're tremendously income subsidized based on their status, and so there are the quick home energy checkup. There are lots of programs out there around offsetting utility bills, especially in the wintertime. So a lot of it ultimately is just about education about what's available from a programmatic perspective.
Cool, thank you. So I'm a homeowner in Baltimore, and my wife and I are very lucky. The house we bought already had solar panels installed, and they're not even like the leased solar panels, like they are owned, they are ours. So there are months that BG&E sends us a check. It's great. But not everybody lucks into that. We had a gas stove. We replaced it last year with an induction cooktop stove and oven, actually, which I love. I couldn't believe how slow it took water to boil on a gas stove on Thanksgiving at my aunt's house. It was like I was standing here waiting for this pot to boil. It was like it would be steaming by now. If you haven't seen one, you should check them out. They are 1,000 times better than a gas stove, I promise you. Anyway, diversion. It's not cheap. We're fortunate. We could drop a couple $100s on the stove. We got it on a Black Friday sale. We could hire the plumber to carry the gas and all that. But, not everyone is in those situations. One of the big things that happened, last year and a half ago, was the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. But it was also sneakily a climate change bill. There were a lot of provisions in there for energy efficiency, tax credits, all this sort of thing. So Stephen, I'm hoping you can maybe walk us through a little bit about some of the different ways that your organization connects people to those resources and what those resources are and what they look like in Maryland.
Sure. Yeah, we haven't talked about IRA or the IRA, depending on how you want to say it, just yet. So there are a series of programs. I'll talk about a few of them related to residential buildings that are really intended to help everybody defray the cost of making the transition. As I mentioned earlier, if you're thinking about going electric, it's often most cost effective to do so when you have to replace a broken thing that's fossil fueled anyway, as opposed to trying to replace it early. So you're really thinking about the incremental cost of the heat pump over the new gas furnace, or the incremental cost of the heat pump water heater over a new gas water heater. So it's, the top line is expensive, but in many cases you'd be having to spend that money anyway to get a new piece of infrastructure for your home. So we have a calculator on our website, rewiringamerica.org, which is where anybody could go put in their zip code and their income, and it determines based on your income level and zip code how much incentive and tax credit you might be eligible for a whole host of different things that you can do to support building electrification. There are there's a tax credit program, and then there are two rebate programs that really matter the most for individual homeowners, and to some degree also for renters. Although it's tricky because landlords kind of make most of the decisions, but these programs also apply to building owners and landlords. So it's a little complex, but the way the programs work, there's a rebate program within the Inflation Reduction Act called the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Act. It is distinctly for people who make less than 150% of the area median income, who then are eligible for up to $14,000 in direct upfront cost reductions for a lot of stuff. So the equipment, as well as the installation costs, as well as the wiring or circuit breaker upgrades that you may need. So if you're a low income homeowner or low income landlord, you can redeem a lot of upfront cost reductions directly off the top of the cost of the replacement system. And again, that's ideally against the incremental cost of the new electric thing. So that brings things a lot closer to cost parity. And hopefully in many cases you save money. It's probably still not enough to do everything. Like, these are big, expensive projects, and we're working on other programs to develop low cost financing to help people make the financing affordable. But again, if you make less than, I believe it's 90% of the area median, you're eligible to take 100%, apply 100% of your project costs towards that $14,000 cap. If you make between 90 and 150%, you can apply 50% of project costs, but it all adds up. $14,000 right off the top is a lot of money. There's another program. Oh, sorry. This program is not alive in the market yet. It's still being developed by the states. So Maryland State Energy Office is in the process of developing its own sort of rules and regulations about how people can access this funding. That should be coming out hopefully sometime in 2024. There's another program which looks at whole home energy reductions called the HOMES program, oddly enough, which is another chunk of change again that people can redeem for weatherization, building envelope improvements. And then, so that's all primarily aimed at low and moderate income households. And then for everybody with a tax liability, so if you pay income taxes, there's a major upgrade to what's called the Section 25C of the tax code, which is the efficiency tax credit program, which has existed for a very long time. And up until now has had a $2,000 lifetime cap. So as a homeowner, you could write off $2,000 worth of 30% of project costs up to $2,000 total for your over the course of your, I guess, tax paying history. Now you can do that every year. Now you can redeem that $2,000 year after year. So if you have, I'm going to use it this year for my heat pump water heater, I'll get 30% off the equipment cost and the installation cost come tax time. So you have to wait, obviously, for those to come to when you file your taxes, but those funds are available. That program is available now and will be, sort of on the tax forms come 2024.
That's great. So it's not like we're still waiting for all of these things. Some of the programs are active now.
The tax
Can-
credits now, yeah, and the rebates, again, for low and moderate income coming 2024 sometime. And these are also in addition to state and utility rebate programs that already exist. So again, for my water heater, BG&E has an $800 credit for heat pump water heater that I'll redeem rebate. So once I get it installed and get the serial number in a couple of weeks, I'll send that in to BGE and get $800 back theoretically pretty soon.
This is admittedly a selfish question, but is it retroactive? Can I go back and get money back for the stove that we bought last year?
So the stove, let's see. The stove
Or the
is-
wiring that we paid
the
for?
wi-
Please,
It depends on your income level.
Please
So if
consult
it-
with your tax accountant.
but I don't know that the rebates will be retroactive necessarily. That'll depend on the state rules. The tax credits are as of the beginning of this year. So if you've done an efficiency project this year and it's one of the things that's eligible, it's not as broad as the rebates. So I don't know that wiring qualifies for a tax credit. But the efficient equipment certainly does.
I had to try. Maybe we'll get lucky with the water heater or the heat pump next year. Jeremy, did you have anything on the IRA or anything, or?
No, I just wanted to follow up with something that Stephen mentioned at the end. There are incentives and rebates available right now through the Empower Maryland Act, which has been around for a long time, going on 15 years now. The $800 rebate that Stephen mentioned for the heat pump water heater. They also have 0% financing for 1 year through several utility-based programs. So you can definitely hit the BG Empower Maryland Act page. They also have incentives for envelope improvements for your home, up to $7,500, I think, in terms of total upgrade incentives that are available right now through BGE's Smart Energy program that have been around for a long time. They may be changing in 2024. The PSC is working on a ruling right now in terms of what those programs are going to look like to start the new year, but they're in existence right now, and you can hit the website, get some details for those incentives as well.
And I don't know if any of you guys have installed LED light bulbs yet in your house, but like you don't change those ever. It's great. You know, they're a little more expensive, but you're not paying every 6 months to swap them out. And BG will, or at least they used to, they would send you a few for free. I don't know if they still do, but they're on the website. We've talked a little bit about the awareness and, how we talk to people about climate change, how we bring attention to these issues. Avery, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you saw in climate change preparedness surveys and what sort of questions people should be asking.
Yeah, so when part of our drafting of the most recent climate action plan, I conducted a climate change emergency preparedness survey to kind of gauge how people were feeling about climate change, and also ask what type of impacts people were already experiencing. People are already experiencing, and I'm sure have been for a while, damage to homes and flooding on their yards, and then also a couple surprising things to me, and I'm glad that I included these options where some people didn't have AC when they needed it, some people didn't have water when they needed it, food when they needed it, and the county does provide this kind of stuff. We have warming and cooling centers available, and some people just are not aware of that. And that is a job for the county, us, and again, out of the climate action plan, we hope to increase awareness. I was very surprised going back a little bit. The majority of survey respondents had no idea what a warming and cooling center was and where they were. And then also the majority of the respondents that answered that question said that they would use one, but they're like, what is this? And then we had about 40% of survey respondents said they had no idea where to access these resources. And about a little less than 50% had no idea where to look for emergency preparedness resources. And they are all out there, or a lot of them are out there, but they're kind of like all over the place. So we're working on like combining that into like an easy page where people can like access whatever they need. There's actually a great website called the Care app. It's also an app, and it has all these different resources available to the public. But yeah, the problem is that no one knows about these kind of things. Like a very small group of people know about these kind of things. So we want to, I mean, these tabling events are great, and this is a way to increase awareness and then also taking advantage of public speaking opportunities. Yeah, so we're doing what we can to increase awareness because that's a very important part of resiliency.
So what can the people here or online who are engaged, listening, trying to learn, how can we talk to our neighbors? How can we make sure the people who need this information get it?
Yeah, definitely we like, or sorry, I always say we, but like the county can do so much, but also you as just a resident of Howard County can talk to your neighbors about this, especially if your neighbor is experiencing hardship. And I know that a lot of people are, or not a lot of people, but there are some people kind of ashamed about their place and then they won't speak up. And I think creating like a safe space and just being kinder to your neighbors and being vulnerable with your neighbors opens opportunities for people to talk to each other about what is available and what they're using to help them. So
Yeah. And Jeremy, Stephen, I think you've both mentioned, or somebody mentioned, different solar purchasing agreements. If maybe you can't get panels on your house or you can't lease panels on your house, you can buy into different community groups. Is that something that either of you could talk a little bit more about?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. So I think that's one of the things that I think is another information gap that's out there. But there are multiple ways that an individual homeowner can access renewable energy for their home. Beyond just installing solar panels on their house, which is great. For our solar program that we have here in the community, one of the things that we've struggled with from day one when we launched it is because it's 50 years old and it's surrounded by trees. We actually have to turn away a lot of homeowners that are interested in solar that come to our program because we pull them up on Google Maps and they're surrounded by trees. And it's like, well, can I cut down my trees? No, you cannot. That's not something that is a trade-off for solar. But if you cannot install solar panels on your home, there are numerous options available. So community solar is one, and I think Stephen's mentioned it a couple of times. Neighborhood Sun is one of the providers that's out there, but essentially that's where you're able to sort of buy into a share of a solar farm that's happening somewhere, for example, in Western Howard County. And again, typically there's an income sort of aspect to the community solar programs, at least there was recently, where based on your income status, you could get 5% or some number, 5 or 10% below BGE standard offer service rate. So based on your income status, you could actually sign up to a community solar program and get electricity cheaper than what you would get through BGE standard offer program, which was tremendous. So community solar is really taken off. And so that's again something where you can just sign up and take a share of a solar farm that's somewhere in the community within BGE service territory. The other piece of it is you can purchase RECs on your own independently. So TerraPass, and there are lots of systems out there. We can actually purchase renewable energy credits independently as a homeowner. And then you can also, as a deregulated state, Maryland, you can seek out your own electricity provider. So Green Mountain Power, Clean Currents, there's been a lot of different vendors that are out there that can supply your power that have wind renewable energy certificates attached to it that are basically embedded in that power to offset the emissions associated with your use. So for example, the Columbia Association, when we recently completed our bulk power purchase agreement or our bulk purchase agreement for our supply for all of our facilities, we have wind renewable energy certificates bundled into that purchase. So whatever we're not getting from our solar farm in West Friendship or from the solar panels on our own buildings, whatever power we actually use separate from that is offset with wind renewable energy certificates. So that's that's another option. So for me, there's multiple ways to access and support renewable energy as a homeowner.
Thank you. So we'll get to the Q&A in a second, but before we do, I promised we wouldn't end on a totally bummer of a note. So we're going to try that. We'll start with Steve and we'll work this way. The question's not quite as simple as, okay, so what do we do? But it kind of is, right? What, as engaged members of the community, what can we do to mitigate the worst effects? What can we do to affect change? What do you see that's kind of keeping you going,
Make a plan. I guess as a homeowner, I'm assuming most people in this room are probably homeowners. Make a plan. Understand how. I'm just going to keep coming back to building electrification because that's what I do. Understand how your home works. Understand what energy you use. Look at it holistically. If you get an oil bill, you don't get it monthly like your gas bill or your electric bill, but it's still part of your energy use, just like the gasoline you put in your car, which you fill up as often as you fill up. That's all energy use. That's all fossil fuel use that you have in and around your life, that it's in your best interest and the best climate interest to replace when it's feasible to do so. So get a plan together. We have tools on our website. There's plenty of resources out there to do that. And if you can't find them, I'll give you my phone number. Put a plan together and be ready to make the change. So think about buying a hybrid or a fully electric car next time, and think about how much it's gonna make your electric bill go up, but your gas bill is gonna go down. So there are ways you can calculate that and think about your energy use and your energy costs and your emissions holistically, so that when your electric bill does go up, you're not like mad at your electric car because you recognize that you're saving $400 a month on gas, right? There's the same thing will happen with oil heat, where you're going to stop receiving a $800 bill every couple of months in the winter. Maybe you've installed an induction stove and you no longer have emissions in your house. That's got value, right? That's not something you can put a price on per se, but it's something that really matters to your health and your comfort. And you can start to think about all of this in a way that's a little bigger than, well, what's my electric bill look like today? And start to understand that there's benefits to be had that go beyond the energy use, certainly climate, health, comfort, safety, resilience, all of it. So planning is really the first and best thing you can do, is to start to get a deeper understanding of all this and understand what your options are.
Avery?
Yeah. So I would definitely not be speaking here if I didn't think there was hope. When we were drafting the climate action plan, it was a struggle. We all had different expertises and different priorities within our office, which made it kind of challenging. But then we were able to eventually we were able to come up with like a consistent plan where we were able to prioritize everything that we saw was important in the environment and for the community, and create actions and steps. And then as we involved other departments, which was also kind of a struggle because they're all working on other things. Like a part of the Office of Community Sustainability is literally like climate action, but we recognize that other departments didn't have time to focus on that, and we're like, why are you coming to me with extra work? But we were able to kind of not frame it, but literally be like, you're an expert in your field and you can use you have that power to integrate these climate solutions into your work. And that kind of gave me hope, because now we have these awesome work groups, which across different departments, people are coming together with their expertises and helping get this started. Yeah, I'm actually very much looking forward to what comes out of these work groups, and then also what the community does as well. And I do definitely have hope.
That's great. Jeremy?
Wow, where do I go with this? I think, for me, I think I'm gonna talk about, I'm just gonna hang my hat on technology and that things continue to advance. I talked about how, the projections around climate change, that things are happening faster than we thought around the impacts. Well, things are happening faster than we thought around innovation and solutions as well. No one would have expected that the cost of solar would come down to parity with fossil, right? Like no one would have projected that 5 or 10 years ago, but here we are. Nobody would have projected the advancements in battery technology, right? And yet it's happening right now. And there are massive battery backup installations throughout California and the West and in other places that are making real impacts on how to effectively implement renewables that may have time variances in terms of when it's generated, because that's one of the big hurdles, right? Is the duck curve, whatever you want to call it, where there's peak generation that doesn't align with peak demand in the grid. And so as these technologies come online to solve those temporal issues on renewable generation versus with consumption in the marketplace, then these solutions happen really fast. And for example, I talked about the wind RECs that offset all of the Columbia Association's power that's not from solar. Those are wind turbines in Oklahoma and Texas, right? Massive amounts of renewable energy are being generated because it economically makes sense, right? Whatever your political bent may be in the reddest of states, right? Here you have wind farms everywhere because it's economically right. It makes sense. And so you can't argue with the economics there. And so for me, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to hang my hat on technology, that the continuing advancements and progressions around clean tech will, help mitigate some of the future risks that we're facing.
That's great. Thank you. So we will jump into some of the submitted questions. And I am thrilled by this first one because there's not much that annoys me more than when I hear my neighbor's gas-powered leaf blower going off. It's so loud. It smells bad. You don't need it anyway. Don't rake your leaves. It's fine in your yard. So there's been a decent amount of interest tonight in battery-powered equipment and electrifying tools and equipment. So I'm wondering, if any of you in your organizations or in your life have seen that transition away from gas-powered equipment.
I love my electric lawnmower and my electric battery powered leaf blower and my electric string trimmer. They're phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah. The lawnmower is lightweight. Like it weighs like 30 pounds less than a gas mower, and I can do my whole yard. It's not very big. It's a Columbia yard, right? It's not huge, but it works perfectly fine. And yeah, it's quiet. Doesn't stink.
Yeah, and also as a county, we are now piloting this transition. We are in the process of getting electric landscaping equipment and testing it out and seeing what the benefits are. So we are able to share that with the community.
Columbia Association is actively exploring these technologies as well within our open space management team. The leap from residential to commercial around load profiles for the equipment is significant. Whereas Steve may mow a third of an acre, we got 2,000 acres to mow, right? So we have had some issues with equipment that it doesn't meet our needs around longevity, because a lot of times, and there's pricing aspects too, like a zero turn right on commercial grade mower can be $50,000, right? So there are real cost aspects to it. But CA being who we are, we're aggressively looking to deploy these technologies and use them where they're feasible, and as the technology becomes available at a commercial use profile. All the equipment that we use at Town Center, for example, is electric. So we are continuing to push it, and we're doing some demos with Toro and some of the major manufacturers at the turn of the year to really try to get some of the more commercial grade equipment into our portfolio. One of the neat things I saw actually is the Sewell's Orchard Pond rehabilitation project in Long Reach. So they have a tremendous amount of pumping that they're doing right now to manage storm flows that run into that pond, to divert it from where they're doing the work. And I was out there with the crew, just sort of doing a walkthrough. And so traditionally to run these massive pumps to move water, they would have a diesel generator running. But they were running these pumps and I didn't hear a sound. I didn't hear a diesel generator sound. But what they had was a massive battery on a trailer that would run. I was asking him all the details because I kind of geeked out on it. I was like, what is this? It's the biggest battery I've ever seen. But it was something that they could pull out to a job site and run some of these commercial large high volume pumps off of a battery for a week at a time. Right. And so, again, you're starting to see the benefits of these technologies come to the fore, and the value around the noise, not having to bring the truck the fuel out to the job site. And it's on a trailer and it's this battery that runs this huge pump for a week. So it's fantastic. So.
Not to mention small engines that are in lawnmowers and string trimmers and all these things are some of the most high emissions engines there are. They particulate matter, like health impacts and black carbon and all these like really terrible greenhouse gases. A lot of them come from these small engines that you wouldn't, you don't use them very much. So the individual impact is not particularly high, but the net impact of all of them in the millions and millions, tens of millions is tremendous.
Yeah, if you have a yard that is appropriately sized for an electric mower, we got married this year. My favorite gift wasn't the Dutch oven, it wasn't the money toward the honeymoon fund. It was the Lowe's gift cards that allowed me to buy a battery lawnmower. It has improved my life so much. It gets done so much. Anyway, so one of the other questions we have is, if when we're talking about vulnerability to climate and to the way things are changing, do we look at natural disaster events like hurricanes when we're evaluating that sort of vulnerability, or is it more of a looking at more weather patterns and what sort of models look like? Are we looking at an increase in event frequency, or are we looking at overall trends?
With hurricanes, that one is a little bit harder to tell. I mean, absolutely be prepared for that kind of stuff. A few months ago, we had Hurricane Lee off the coast, and meteorologists for a long period of time had no idea where it was going. And that was a very destructive storm. And if that hit Maryland, I do not think that we would have been prepared, because we haven't seen a hurricane like that since Hurricane Sandy, I want to say. And that became like a nor'easter by the time it hit the Northeast. But that was very devastating here, and like extremely devastating in New York and New Jersey. But yeah, so hurricanes are a little bit harder to predict, but people are saying that, or scientists are saying that hurricanes might not increase in frequency, but they will definitely increase in intensity because of our sea level rise and the more rainfall events that are being associated with these severe storms, and the storm surges too, and that's due to higher sea levels. So if we continue to build without resiliency in mind, we are going to continue seeing a lot of economic loss from these hurricanes.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was going to say there's sort of two aspects to it, right? There's the acute events, and then there's sort of the chronic aspects where the climates are changing, the weather patterns are changing, the growing seasons are different. You have freak frosts, or you don't have a winter. So I think there's challenges around our ecosystems and how we manage them, because the weather patterns are changing. It impacts invasive management. Talking about my man Eric right there, right? He's our invasive plant guy. He's awesome. Shake his hand. He does good stuff. So there are pieces that as a steward of thousands of acres in our community, there are the derecho pieces where there are these freak storms that come through and knock down trees, and then there's other aspects that are sort of more slow moving and almost more insidious, because you don't really realize they're happening around plant species that can flourish now where they couldn't because climate patterns are changing, or insect species that can flourish now where they couldn't in the past because weather patterns are shifting.
And that carry diseases too.
Yeah, so there's lots of things to be aware of and manage. And from our perspective, personally, I think one adaptation component from an ecosystem perspective is that a healthy and vibrant and diverse ecosystem is a resilient ecosystem. So that's sort of an adaptation measure for open space management for us, as making our ecosystem as healthy as possible and as biologically diverse as possible, so it is more resilient to those changes.
Cool, thank you. This next one, I think we'll go down the line again, and I'm both going to modify the question a little bit, and I'm going to answer it myself because I think it's fun. Someone was wondering if there's been a transition in your own life when it comes to adapting to climate or mitigating climate that has been particularly challenging. I'm going to add particularly challenging or rewarding, so it's not just a total bummer. And I mean, I've been talking about it all night, right? I love my induction stove. Cooking has become so much faster. We can boil a full pot of water in like 4 minutes. It's magic. The electric lawnmower is great. The solar panels have been amazing. You know, we're looking at when it's time to get a new car, we're going to look at we're a 1-car household already. We're going to look at getting an electric vehicle for our next one. If not an e-bike, I'm even considering switching to an e-bike. You know, it's all really, it's exciting. You know, I think you can look at it as something you have to do, or you can look at it as something you get to do because we're living in the 21st century. There's all this great new tech, like you were talking about, that we can really lean on to improve our lives. You know, worst case scenario, oh no, we made things better for ourselves with these changes. I think it's great. You know, we've switched to trying to not eat meat on Mondays because, you know, we've talked about emissions. One of the biggest things a person can do is to, I'm not going to tell anyone you have to cut meat out of your life entirely. I know that's a hard sell, but every time you eat just a little bit less meat, that's one of the best things you can do on an individual basis to lower your own personal environmental impact. So we don't eat meat on Mondays, and that's both challenging and rewarding, right? Because it's something you get to do and experiment together, but it's also a little bit harder to come up with recipes to get you through every single Monday. So Stephen, what about you? What's been challenging or rewarding for you? Or both?
You took all my good examples.
We've been riffing all night. I'm sorry.
I think that, I mean, I've got 3 daughters, and the challenge for me is thinking about the future they're going to inherit in terms of climate and stress on, I'm gonna get us back in the darkness here. Climate and stress on our populations, and you know, it's not gonna be felt as acutely here in Colombia as it is in a place like Bangladesh, where then the sea level rise, it's going to displace lots and lots of people who don't have a lot of means. And like, there's big sort of geoscale things happening societally and economically and everything else that is in response to climate change that eventually will, in big and little ways, affect their lives. So I don't know, that kind of keeps me doing my job every day on the challenge side of the equation. But then I have hope because there's young people like Avery here sitting on this panel with me and, you know, bringing this work forward. So I'll stop with that.
Yeah, actually, before I even answer the question, I do want to do a special shout out to they're not here now, but the Youth Climate Institute came out and did a tabling event, and the tabling event here, and we're distributing information about LEDs and also LEDs themselves. This is an amazing, it's not just them two, they've been doing an amazing job, but this is a huge group of high school students that are very, very passionate about the environment. And I'm seeing this more and more, like these kids are so knowledgeable, smarter than me. Like, I'm just very, very happy to see these different types of programs cropping up and to see an interest, to see these young kids' interest in climate change. Okay, so I'm going to be vulnerable right now and say I'm struggling to pay rent as a young adult. I don't have the money to really make those switches, and yet that's not really an excuse. I can invest in that. because there are a lot of great programs. But I would say right now what I'm actively doing is I am one of those annoying people that make anybody I talk to, I make them aware of what they're doing and how it might impact how it might impact the world. I yell at my roommate for throwing greasy pizza boxes into the recycling bin. I'm also the person that Teams messages my office in the morning if there's severe threat of thunderstorms coming later. So I just really, I'm a big advocate in making people aware of their choices. So
I do the same thing with the pizza boxes at home. And if you don't know, you cannot recycle a greasy pizza box. You can't recycle the grease. And if you put that in your recycling, they take it to the recycling plant and they say, oh no, we can't recycling it. So they throw it in another truck and it gets trucked to the landfill. Just throw it away, or compost apparently. I don't know if everywhere can compost it, but some can, it sounds like. The green bin does. Okay, that's great. I should get one. Cool. Jeremy, did you have anything that's been especially challenging or rewarding in your own personal adaptation?
Oh, my own personal adaptation. That's a great way to put it. No, I think it's sort of the nexus of my personal life and my work are kind of intertwined because I sort of live and breathe what I do. But for me, I think it's about both climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation require change within ourselves and an acceptance of change in systems and the way things have been done around us. And I keep, doing things differently to adapt a system, like our stormwater, for example, right? To build resilient, adaptive systems in our physical environment, they're going to have to look different, right? They're going to have to be bigger. There are going to be things that we're going to have to accept around us. And humans resist change, right? And anything that's different is a problem. So I think, as we see, and it's for me, one of the silver linings of the recent climate events and things that are bringing climate change to light is it's sort of highlighting that human tendency to not make a change until you absolutely have to, right? But as we're starting to see some of these really tangible effects of climate change, again, the wildfires, right? I think there's collectively this awareness of urgency. And so for me, it's sort of one of the nicer things. Well, I guess it's not nice, but it's a silver lining of some of these climate change effects actually coming to the fore, because individuals who are either neutral or against, didn't care, are being, the reality is setting upon them that action needs to be taken. So I think for me, that's one of the things I'm hopeful about, again, is that, we're seeing the effects now. It's generating more interest in action and agency in individuals and communities who otherwise would not have acted, because it's real and it's tangible, because now people can touch it now and it's not something that's 50 years away. I'll stop with that.
That's great. So we'll wrap it up with final question, and we'll kind of zoom out a little bit, get a little bit abstract with it. Let's say you have 30 seconds to a minute to share a message with not just the people here, not just the people online, but anyone across the world that can, they can magically understand you, whatever. What message would you share with the global population about what we can do for climate?
Steve, you got that one.
I really want to say that inaction is going to be way more expensive than action, and I know that's hard to see right now. And even the smallest little choices that you do are going to make a big impact, whether you see it now or you might not ever see it, but it's going to make a big impact in the future, and your kids and your grandkids or whatever are going to see the impacts of the little choices that you made.
I would double down on that. What you do matters. The choices you make every day matter to this. You're not just subject to it. You have some agency here. So take good actions, be prepared, have a plan, make the good choices, be informed, and then go tell your neighbors about it so they get informed as well, right? Don't stop in your own home, but then tell everybody how great your induction stove is, and tell your aunt at Thanksgiving how terrible her gas stove is. That matters.
did.
Like, it really matters. So, think, like, certainly start with yourself, but then think outside the walls of your home and your life, and make it a little bigger than yourself.
She did not appreciate it.
Yeah, I think I would sort of echo Avery in Steve's comments on it, but I think the key is that you have power in your choices. Every decision you make every day. I like the theory of continuous improvement, right? Always looking for ways to optimize or be more efficient. And it's tangible, and it's not something that's abstract, right? Even something as simple as, getting back energy conservation, just turning off lights, being more efficient in terms of how you drive your car, trip training, little things like that can make a difference and add up. So I think you have power to affect change in your daily life. And as an individual, that scales up collectively if you are sort of continuing to do that within your community and share those measures and how lessons learned, that you can sort of scale it broadly within the Columbia community. Again, getting back to being a trusted messenger and Columbia Association serving in that role and serving to continuously educate members of our community about ways that they can be empowered and make decisions every day in their lives that will make a difference over time. And knowing is half the battle. I'll lay it out there as a child of the 80s. Right.
So not to put you on the spot, Delegate Fitzwater, but I'm a journalist, so it's the job, and we have the session coming up soon. Is there anything that folks should know about what the legislature might be looking at this coming session when it comes to energy efficiency, climate, what people can do in their own homes, that sort of thing? Or are we just too far away from the first day to know about that? Fair enough.
Not quite as ambitious goals, and are not at right, and look at, one of the things I probably know is that we do not have economy, we do not have right, and so looking at not our time, but it for next time the parking can right job with that is as my thing
Thank you / I'm sorry for putting you on the spot like that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I add in one more piece? The one thing I want to add, and it sort of dovetails under the legislative piece, but be vocal, right? Engage in the system and in the process, both from a legislative standpoint and even in the market with your dollars, right? You have power in terms of where you spend things, and make that a tool to drive transformation into things. But county council meetings, legislative sessions, right? Legislators show up, right? Because I think there's a lot of times where good policies or programs falter because there aren't enough voices behind them to support them. And there's a lot of people on the sidelines that either are too busy or are not interested or don't feel like exposing themselves, right? Don't feel like stepping out into the light to say, this is good, I support it. And there are certainly a lot of actors out there that will step up to shoot something down because it doesn't fit their business model or whatever it may be. So that would be one thing I would actually really highlight going away from this is make your voice heard and use that tool to advance these policies that otherwise struggle without it. Let legislators understand there's a movement behind these measures and these programs that are supported so that they will take the risk and advocate for them and make them happen.
Thank you all very much.
Awesome. Few parting notes. I promise I'll be brief because we are right. I want to respect everybody's time, but a reminder to everybody that this will be posted on CA's YouTube page. We'll get that link to everybody who registered so you can share it with others if you're interested in doing so. Before you head out, the most important piece for us before you head out, please look under your seats. No, look on your seats, and you probably see one of these. If you filled out a question on it, no biggie. We've got others at the table, or maybe a seat next to you has one. This is our way of understanding how you enjoyed, didn't enjoy, felt mediocre about tonight's event. We hope you enjoyed it, but this is really our way of collecting feedback and understanding where to go with this next. We've done different topics for each of these speaker series events, so it's important that we hear from you of what topics we want to see in the future. So, and then friends on Zoom, I will get you a link if you clearly you registered. So I will get you a link of this exact same thing, but in virtual form. Thank you for everyone who came here tonight. It may be very tempting to stay and chat. I understand that, but I ask that we respect our friends at Claret Hall here and start making our way back to wherever you know, the saying, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So we have a little cleanup. You don't have to rush out, but please be, respectful of that crew. Thank you again for being here. You made a difference tonight by being here. So hope to see you at a future Changing Columbia event. Thanks.